All right, we're good. Okay, I'll do the intro. Hi, folks. This is the weekly network policy sub-project meeting under SIG Network. And this is the October 26th meeting. Ricardo, did you want to start with the agenda or?
Andrew,
Yeah.
we forgot to tell everybody to be nice to each other.
Yes, and of course, be nice to each other. Follow the protocol.
Yeah, so let's get started. Andrew proposed that we pass through the CAP reviews before going through the summarized user stories. So I'm gonna share my screen here. You need to allow me, Andrew, I think.
Yeah, one sec.
Yeah.
All right, you're good.
Okay. Here we go. So I'm gonna pass through Jay's first, but yours is on work in progress, right, Jay? Do you wanna?
Oh, I have a little. I did the thing. It looks like it's working for me. I changed the internal implementation of the data structure to for the network policy struct to use what the two different types of like potential like namespace fields, and it seems to be working. So that's my update there. That was just something that me and Andrew and some other people had talked about. That's, I think, the only issue we have around it. Everything else is mostly just paperwork, which is whether or not we can not break the API and enable and get rid of the label selector as the implementation of the namespace selector, and instead have the namespace selector point to a struct, like a struct that can be either, that can have one of both, either one of those fields. And it looks like it's working. That's the only update I have there. I should probably update this KEP to have that implementation. I don't know. Should the KEP have that implementation detail at this point, or is that just going to create a bunch of, like, are we at the point where we should have that?
I think it would be good to have this probably here in the proposal or in the design details.
Okay. And I think I have an artifact of me copying and pasting your KEP in here.
Yeah, I saw that here.
Because I just like basically took yours and modified it because it was mostly the same.
So I think I'm a little confused. So yeah, like my understanding is that we're all in agreement of Zhang's suggestion last week, which is to put like match names under name selector, right? And so you're saying that you did some validation and it works, right? But if we're saying that the change is potentially breaking, then I think that puts the solution off the table, right? Like we can't break V1 APIs. So I'm confused as to. Yeah,
I think it's not breaking.
Not breaking. Okay.
It's not breaking from the perspective of the API, which is really only the YAML input.
But right. So like I have no doubts that if we created a new cluster using a new client and a new server, that wouldn't break because everything's on the same version. Mm-hmm. I think the concern is like if you have an old client against a new server, or like if you're an old client updating to the new client, is that breaking? I think like that's the by breaking change.
I mean, yeah, it's a different type. So it definitely, but it just depends on what you define as breaking, because Dan had mentioned that the only thing we actually have to keep is the YAML. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you're changing the type for sure. I mean, there's always potential gray area. Like maybe there's something that goes on with clients where you can create some kind of a migration thing, right? So maybe that's the thing that I need to look into, is whether the client is, but then again, it's not V1 anymore, right? So
Yeah. So like, so the way I see it is like if we can make the change so that the JSON YAML serialization is non-breaking both ways, like from old clients and new clients and whatnot. And the only thing breaking is the Go types. Like if a CNI updates the latest API types and then that breaks, if that's the only thing that breaks, then maybe there's a justification here where we can say like the actual like API server traffic isn't breaking. It's just implementers have to fix that one type. I think that's a better case, but it's not clear to me yet if even the JSON serialization breaks.
oh, okay. So yeah, what is the yeah, so I guess that's pretty black and white because I compiled a release just a little while ago, so I can actually run that release, put it through its paces, and see whether it works or not. That's a black and white thing. Then the question winds up being about the client Go. But I guess we can do baby steps, right? I can see if this packed up thing works, and if that works for you, that's just what I'll do. I'll just see how far I can go with it and try to. I mean, I guess the simplest thing to do is to try to implement this, right, and then see what breaks where, right? Because I think that's going to be faster than doing a bespoke specific experiment on one thing or other. Because there's probably other things we want to look at, right?
Yeah, and then I think the other thing is like we should look at the API convention. There's an API guidelines doc or something.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's something in there explicitly about breaking Go types, then like we know for sure that the Go type has to break. So if that in itself is enough to call this a breaking change, then we probably want to give up on this early, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I can do that. So it's a little bit of a searching for a negative result thing. So it might be, unless they specifically say breaking the client, but I can at least do a cursory look for it, right? Client search, because I don't think they're going to say, don't worry, if you break somebody's old client, you're still like, that's okay, right? But they may have something. So search for client Go backward compatibility, and then just test out the release with old Met PolyYAML. Yeah, I mean, I can poke around at that over the next week and see where we get.
And also, if you could update the CapG with the
get rid of port ranges. Yeah, let me do that right.
Yeah. No, not with the port ranges, but probably with the proposal. Yeah.
I'll keep the port ranges.
Okay.
Let's move. Just as a token reminder. Okay. Yeah. So that's all I got. Yeah. I'll do that. If anybody else wants to bang away at this, let me know. I'll just push a branch at some point. And that's it for me, from my end. If anybody wants to look at the CAP and leave any actual feedback on it, anything else before we try to get other people to review it,
Okay.
Go for it.
Thank you, Jay. So about mine, the port range, I'm trying to be fast so we can go to the cluster scope cap. I have reviewed Andrews and then Winship and also Abhishek proposals here in the comments. And I have removed the user story from the exceptions as we spoken in Slack. Implementing exceptions might be something like specifying multiple ranges and removing the exceptions from here, but we can put them again. And also, yeah, there is another thing that I've made some. Then Winship has raised about the concerns from the Open vSwitch OpenFlow not supporting multi-ports, and this being probably a problem for Antria and for OpenShift. So if folks from Antria, I know that there is a lot here, could take a look and see how hard is this going to be, or if this is going to be a not hard concern, it would be great. And so my cap is almost finished. I just need to change here. We have just only one story. I think this is enough because we can like say why use port range. And the only thing that I need to change yet is the min and max here to from and to, as suggested by you in Slack. And please take a look, folks. Also, I'm gonna remove this suggestion of using the host port range because I agree that that's a different part of the code and this might break things.
So on the topic of OpenFlow and ranges, is it like, so for implementations that don't use like IP tables and can't specify like a range in the rules, the expectation would be that like if I'm managing an OpenFlow table, I'd have to put a rule per port in the range, right? Is that bad enough that we want to block on this? Like, is that like, that's a worst case scenario, which to me is not like also bad. So maybe like, I don't know, Abhishek, like if you were to add this in Entrea and you have to write an OpenFlow rule per port in a range, is that bad for any reason?
We haven't yet seen in terms of like how inefficient or efficient that implementation would be, but we are looking at pushing some code in the OFNet library to do some sort of masking and try to implement this. I can maybe get more details next week because this week we're trying to pin down on some of the implementation or the design for the port range. And I know some of the team members are working working towards this using some masking features. So maybe I'll get back to you guys. I don't think I'll be able to give you how efficient versus inefficient this new method would be. It's just that there is a way, and I do believe that the team has already found one.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so there is the same concern about the, I don't know if there is someone from Cilium, from Isovedic here, or any other eBPF CNI, but I know there is the same concern here about the eBPF because you need to change how probably how you are going to populate the eBPF maps or like using a different map. But I think this is probably going to be like, okay, we have this in the API, but it's up to the CNI how is this going to be implemented, right?
Yes.
Okay, so from me that's it. Abhishek, do you wanna pass through the cluster scope cap, the work that has been done?
Yeah. So I thought it's a good time to just provide us update in terms of what few of us have been doing on the cluster scope part. So we've been meeting weekly between Zhang, Gobin, Yang, Chris Luciano, and myself on the cluster scope policy. For it's been almost a month, I think, for 3 to 4 weeks that we met. So far, I think in terms of timelines, what we think is that maybe in the 1.21 cycle is when we will open the KEP for review, but target merge in the 1.22 cycle, considering this is going to be, there's going to be a lot of feedback on this, and it's going to be a large effort. On the other hand, some of the decisions that we have made is that we want to start we want to start with pods, target them as the workloads, but keep room for future selectors, for example, nodes and, external workloads, which are also being, considered in upstream in a new CRD. So those, we want to keep room so that the selectors can select those nodes or external workloads. But basically we want to model it closely to the Kubernetes network policies, start with the pod as the workload. When I say pod as a workload, I don't mean just the pod selector, but it can also be namespace selector or maybe in future service selector, but essentially it would be applied to the pods. The other thing that, two of the main concerns or guarantees that we want to give with the cluster network policy is that the administrators can provide, these strong guardrail or policies which a developer cannot override. And the other guarantee is that administrator may want to provide some sort of a baseline or default security for the cluster, which the developers can override. So those are the two kinds of use cases that may arrive for a cluster scope policy. So we want to target that. We want to ensure that the resource or the CRD that we come up with is able to solve both of these use cases. The other thing is that we have decided is, or we have been recently working on, is that how to do precedence and priority between Kubernetes network policy and cluster network policy. We have already looked at existing artwork like Calico, Cilia Mantria, and other CRDs that are available today in this space. And each of them have their own unique way of, or in some cases overlapping ways of solving this problem. So essentially, as a team, we decided that we will come up with two proposals, and we will back one proposal as a main proposal and have the other proposal as an alternate proposal. Now, the two proposals would be broadly, I won't go into details. Maybe we'll have a, once we have a proper spec for the resource, we'll present it to you guys. But essentially, broadly, the two proposals are, one would be a priority-based proposal, where you have some priority numbers which would indicate which policy wins. The other would be without priorities. That is, it is similar to Kubernetes network policy that if you know what the semantics mean, this is what you get. You don't have to worry about writing priority numbers from policy A to policy B and then wondering how one precedes the other. So these are the two broad range of proposals that we'll come up with. And I think in the next few weeks, we want to solidify the two proposals. Our aim for this week is to come up with all the use cases and come up with a model and then run those use cases against those models and see whether they satisfy all the use cases that we want to solve, and then mold the API in that shape. And maybe in the next couple of weeks we will be able to come up with a sort of like a spec or a API sketch for this cluster network policy. And at the end of that, we will come to this meeting and then propose the spec, and then maybe we can take it forward from there. And once we have like a broader acceptance from everyone on the call, then we will open up the KEP for review and then get a broader feedback. And I think Dan's on the call as well, and let me know if I missed out on anything that you also want to add.
Yeah, that sounds a very good summary of what we did.
Yeah, that's all I have.
All right, great. Nice. Yeah, so I think that we can move forward. Anyone had any question about the cluster scope and network policy work that is being done by Abhishek, Zhang, and the group?
Yeah, by the way, anyone who wanted to join the group, maybe just contact Abhishek or for me, someone to join if you would like to participate in the discussion as well.
Yeah, can ping also in the Slack channel, both of you, I think, right?
Yes, I'll leave the Zoom and the Google Doc that we're working on the Slack channel. So yeah, anyone feel free to join.
Nice.
Yeah, if there's like I don't know if I would join, but maybe every once in a while, if y'all post some public status in that new room we have in the open channel, that might be kind of cool. Just so we can kind of see the flyby, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think we in our Google Doc we have maintained the agenda and the the meeting notes. So I'll paste the Google Doc link, and we'll keep updating that section, and everyone can view that. And yeah, I think that's a good idea. We can keep posting some notes every week.
Yeah, just a little banter every once in a while, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or even to add to that, like some API sketches that we can bring up in this call, just so we can, you know, if there's anything obvious that we might be able to catch, or like compatibility issues, it'd be good to raise those. But I guess we don't have to worry about compatibility because it's a new resource, but you get what I mean.
Yeah, I think good idea. Thanks.
All right, so let's move to the next item of the agenda. It's the review of the summarized user stories. Andrew, do you want to share your screen and take control?
Yeah, sure. Give me a sec. Y'all can see that?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, so basically Ricardo had asked me a few weeks back to telling me that it'd be great if like we can, you know, kind of collect all the data that we had in our agenda doc. So basically what I did was I went through, actually, let me pull it up. So here, so this is the working doc that we had at the bottom of the agenda. There's all the user stories that Jay and other folks have collected over time. So basically what I did was I went through all the user stories, took the ones that sounded like coherent and sounded kind of like, okay, like we've talked about this before, and you know, we've said that, you know, these are reasonable. There are some items where, like Ricardo, when we talked about scope of the sub-project a while back, we said we're not going to worry about like container level restrictions. So like things like process restriction, I just kind of took out. And basically, I summarized it into these short paragraphs describing what the problem that we're trying to solve and what concretely, like what in the API we'd want to see. So these first three, like we've already discussed, you know, a million times: port ranges, namespace selection by name, and cluster scope network policies, right? The other three, so these all have status kept in progress. The other three that I was able to kind of pull out of this list here was node policies. So selecting nodes by labels or by names or whatever, and being able to like restrict traffic between nodes and between pods in the cluster. So we don't support that today. The other one was FQDM policy, which Gobin has brought up a few times. And there's another proposal that he put together on this one. So I think we all agree that like we want to solve FQDM policies. We just don't know if it belongs in network policy or another resource or whatever. And then the last one that was kind of a valid use case from the list was selecting pods by service. So basically, instead of having to select labels by pods and indicate like what ports of the pod you want to allow or deny, if we can select a service, we can inherit the pod selector from the service and also extract the ingress ports and the egress ports, whatever, from the service specification, instead of assuming that the author of the network policy understands like what the pod's ports are. So like, to me, based on kind of reading through these a few times, these are the concrete user stories I found were kind of like, I would say like accepted. These are kind of like the accepted ones. And I think it'd be great if like over time we remove or add things to this list based on kind of the user stories that we've been kind of hearing from the community. Yeah, that was it. Questions about any of these? Does anyone disagree on any of these, on whether any of these should be in here? Or does anyone know of the user story in this list where we felt like they should be added to this list that I didn't include?
Yeah, I think that's great. Here about the FKDN, I think Gobin already started to write a cap, right, with Zhang, and team. So I think this is like
my understanding of the FQDM policy was that we need to figure out whether it makes sense for this to live in network policy, or if it makes sense to live in another resource that, like DNS policy or whatever it's going to be. That at least that was my understanding. I might have misheard.
No, I think you are right. They were discussing about if this is like a new object or if this should be inside the network policy. Yeah. So I think with this document, we can like define a scope of like, because that we can finish those caps and also open while the cluster scope and network policy, when this is ready, we can move forward with those one and probably trying to add them inside the network policy, or like this node policy inside the cluster scope network policy. So this for me is like, how are we going to drive this project to the next levels and the next cap? Does anyone miss something here from the best user stories, from the best that were here in the main document?
No, this is a good, yeah, I really like this summary. Appreciate it for sure. I think this is all the ones that are useful. I think all the other ones were definitely either out of scope or just too complicated to implement. I have a one comment, which is that the service one, so there was a mailing list thread in 2018 where Tim Hawkins said, this is the biggest mistake that the network policy API originally made, was not targeting services. I don't know if anybody recalls that thread or not. I think it was 2018 or something like that. So that one is like really interesting, right? Because the minute that you target services instead of pods, like I wonder like whether that's such a paradigm shift that that also, I don't want that to be out of scope of the network policy API, but I wonder whether it's such a paradigm shift that somebody looking at the network policy API for what it currently is today would say, yeah, this is not a network policy API thing. This is some other thing, even though it should be a network policy API thing. I don't know. That's just a discussion question, not like an opinion. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so I intentionally didn't label anything here as like V1 or V2 because I want the acceptance of like the use case and the user story to be separate from like discussions on whether we think it should be added to the existing API or future APIs. So like, I think the pod selection by service is like really like borderline, like, should we add it to V1 or should it be like in a new V2 thing? So that we definitely need to have like that discussion because you're right, like it's a total shift in the way the network policy model works. So introducing it now might be a little too disruptive.
So probably we should start thinking about those next user stories as new API objects, right, Andrew? But the node policy that could be like something inside the cluster scope and network policy.
I don't think I'm not trying to be prescriptive here to any sort of solution. I just want to make sure like whatever we add to like the final list of user stories or whatever, or like the summarized list, are the use cases that we've kind of vetted out and we've discussed and we've acknowledged as like valid use cases. And then once we kind of accepted the use case, we can kind of like banter about whether we think it should belong in V1 or V2 or a new resource or whatever. That makes sense.
Okay. I have no opposition for all those user stories at all. I don't know what the next steps we wanna take. Like, do we wanna propose this also to the C? Do we want to deep dive here inside the sub-project meetings and see what can we get from these and propose later? Actually,
Yeah, like I think so. So like the no policy one is a good example, I think, of something we know we want to fix. Like the problem is glaringly obvious, but the solution to fix the problem is not so obvious, and it's complex and potentially breaking if we tried to add it to V1. So I think, yeah, like I think next steps are like we should discuss the accepted user stories like over and over again until we kind of get consensus on a solution that we think is reasonable, and then we can start writing the catch for that. But like the no policy one, like I think it's going to be a while until we can think of a good solution for this that doesn't involve like a V2 API, or maybe the consensus out of that is like, okay, we need a V2 API for no policies. But so yeah, like I think next step is like talk about the problem enough until we can get consensus on a solution.
all right. So we can add one of those into the next sub-project meeting and spend the meeting discussing about it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. So from those three, what do we want to discuss first? What's the biggest problem that we think we have? That's the node policy, the FQDN, or the selecting pod via services?
I think the FQDN one is more, is like the sense I'm getting is that more people are asking about the FQDN policy. So, and it sounds like, Gobin and Zhang are like willing to do the work. So it'd be great if we can get consensus on like what we think that should look like, and then that way we can get that kept out quickly. Even like today, if we have time, the rest of the 25 minutes, it'd be great to just talk about that one because I know it's been on people's mind.
All right. I don't see Gobin here, but I don't know what have you got about that, Zhang? If you, because Gobin told me that he was going to make some tests with Cilium and see how is this implemented, and so do you have anything about that?
Sure. I actually didn't know that Govan is not here today. But do you have the link to the doc? So maybe we can open that one. Right. So if you scroll it down, we actually have a list of open questions there, right? I mean, it would be nice if we can go over them and see if you have any opinion or preference there as well. So I think overall you already know this proposal, right? Basically, it's just add a selector for FQDN. I mean, we are still debating on what exactly format would be, but the overall idea is that, right? And then we got a lot of comments and questions there. Right. So it looks to us that the first thing is, should this belong to a narrow policy API, or it should be some different places? Would it be, for example, also in first on data plan or in DNS? Because that totally changes things here. I'm not sure what's the convention there, because if we do it on DNS, I feel like we probably cannot do it in a very core-based, because DNS is shared by everyone, right? And then we also have a derived question, that is, what if user just gets the IP address by himself? It doesn't do a DNS lookup. So I'm wondering if anyone has idea like what should be the behavior here, because I know that when Cilium is doing this, what they do is they intercept DNS packet, the query, and then program the IP-based policy on those IP address resolved for that DNS, right? That means if you are using some IP that's not resolved through DNS, it's actually will be I mean, basically it won't work, right? If you allow it, then that IP will be bypassed, or basically it's not known to the system, right? So I'm also curious, like what would be the general consensus here when we talk about allowing traffic to a DNS. If we just block the DNS query, I mean, if that's the case, then it looks to me that even easier way is just to don't give your reply, right? But what if user just figure out the IP address by them own and then just directly do it? Right. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I agree that like the discussion around whether it should be its own resource or not is going to be dependent on, yeah, like where we agree the enforcement should happen. And so, yeah, I had the same question, like, are we assuming that the pod is not trusted in that we don't want it asking another DNS server what the resolved IPs are? Or are we kind of assuming that like every tenant is like trusted enough that whatever default DNS server we give it, like it's going to use that, and all we really want to do is just ensure that whatever resolution, like only the allowed FQDNs are allowed from the DNS server. So like I agree that like the fundamental question we need to answer first is like at what point do we need to do the enforcement based on the type of workload?
Right. Yeah, I found it's pretty hard to answer that question, right? Especially if you look at those in general DNS blocking or how they does, right? They probably will do some periodic scanning to see which IP resolved to those blacklist domain and then periodically updating it, right? So if we want to create all those mappings on the fly, I don't know how easy would that be broke just because user can result to different DNS domain. So I'm also asking Goben to collect more user cases for this and to say, okay, what's the most reasonable way to solve this? So I would say there are still many questions opening there.
Is there like an iterative way you could think about building something like this or designing something like this? Like, is there some, are the user stories, do they boil down to something that would benefit, like even if the way you implemented it was different, they would benefit from the same core, having one or two components that you could build the custom versions of this off of? Or is it like,
There is a comment from Dan Winship, that in OpenShift they do probably what you are thinking, Jay. There is a controller that resolves the host names to IPs and keeps updating the network. I don't know if that's the network policy at all, but keeps updating something with the TTL from the IPs. So if you solve something like www.ricardo.com to an IP, it's going to create a network policy and take note of the TTL of that. And once this is like the TTL is expired, or it's reaching expiry, or is becoming expired, it refreshes the network policy. That's the last comment here. I don't know if that's in the prior art. Yeah.
I kind of feel, I don't know. I kind of feel like that would be tangible if we had that, but
are you, I mean, I feel like that's some implementation detail, right? You say, okay, do I intercept the package DNS query from client, or I have a separate agent which will just periodically resolve the DNS, assuming that every path is within the same location so that they will get the same DNS result. I think I mean, I feel like we could do either way. The only thing is it may not be that accurate. I think one common explanation there is you just cannot do it in a very accurate way because all those expired things changing, you may not know them immediately and so on.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Right. And also but I agree that has a little bit impact to the API though. For example, if you want to have a separate controller to resolve DNS, then, well, still it could work either way, right? You can have a separate object for DNS domain, or you can put it in policy and the other controller can just pass them. So, I don't know. I feel like, yeah, I feel like the only thing is we probably won't put a lot of burden to DNS server if we have a, but that's getting issues anyway there.
Yeah, when the user stories, like, what are the stories behind the stories? Like, what are people like? You know, that's what I would wonder, right? Because, you know, when you look at all the solutions to this, like, the solutions have these different trade-offs, and then it seems like everybody has an opinion on the trade-offs, but like, it's really tricky to figure out whether the trade-offs are just because people have different network, you know, policies, lowercase network policies at their organizations, or whether, you know,
Yeah, I totally
like
agree.
the Antonio's idea versus the operator idea, right? I mean, like, I could see it going either way. It's just, you know, like,
Yeah, I agree. I would suggest that since Goben is not here, I don't speak for him either. So maybe we can defer this discussion and let Goben to collect more use cases, to think about here more. And also, if you guys have any preference on this, definitely we can comment on this talk and let us know.
Yeah,
But that is a major questions I have here is how much accuracy we are okay with there. Are we okay just to intercept the DNS query? I mean, that seems to be a most natural way to do it.
yeah, I'm starting to agree that just like straight up intercepting the DNS request might be the simplest solution, maybe. Like, I think it's worth entertaining the operator idea because it's come up quite a bit. Like Jay mentioned it and Dan mentioned it, where, yeah, like you resolve the DNS query out of band and then you apply the network policy rule. I think it's worth noting that network policy today is not very controller friendly. Like, it's written in a way where like the user creates network policy rule like in the spec, but then there's no like status. There's no status field where you can say like, I resolve some other state and here are the new rules you should dynamically apply. If you wanted to do that today, you'd have to write it into spec. But then if you did that, you could be potentially overriding what a user puts in, or when a user updates network policy, you would overwrite what the controller put in. So like maybe the more fundamental problem is the fact that like network policy doesn't have a status field. And so it leaves no room for controllers to update network policy dynamically. So like maybe that's a separate conversation, but pattern I've been seeing.
we've definitely brought that up before. Yeah, that's definitely come up before.
Right. I mean, implementation wise, it's definitely pretty complicated. That's why we also got this question like, how long are you going to update your entries and so on? Because if you dynamically add, you must have a way to remove the oscillated information as well. Right? You cannot just never up down. So I agree. Implementation wise, it's going to be pretty complicated. What I'm more concerned here is, I think for network policy, it's okay because you have a whitelist model, right? So if we just intercept DNS, we shall be pretty safely allow the traffic that needs to be allowed. But if when we think about cluster network policy, you want to deny something, then I don't know that if intercepting DNS query is enough or not, because in that case, right, user can just bypass DNS lookup and use IP directly, and your purpose is deny, and then you miss that case, right? So that's the thing I'm a little concerned here. but I couldn't find a good solution to there either, unless we always get updated no matter if user doing DNS query or not, we have a separate agent to keep query. Right. Yeah.
Is there a case also where I want to redirect all of specific DNS queries to an IP or a bunch of IP? Is there, like, this probably defines if we wanna make this inside the network policy or if this is a new object. Also with your question about if this should have like an allow and a deny, I want to know if like I want to solve my like www.ricardo.com to a specific IP, but I do not want to use the host aliases inside the pod configuration, but configure this as something global or something for a whole namespace. So is this a use case? Do you know someone that needs that? Like I need my DNS to solve to a specific IP?
I don't completely get the question. You're saying that the DNS depends on which one you query, which address you query, they go to different DNS server or what?
If we have a third action instead of deny or instead of allow, I wanna use like a DNS policy to rewrite the DNS answer.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. So you're saying that we actually make our DNS server to be programmable so that they could give different response for query to some domain. Is that what you mean?
Exactly. So this is like a DNS policy. You can allow, you can deny, but you can also rewrite the answer. And
I think Cloud DNS or some other. I remember that for some DNS service, they actually allow you to hack to say if user query this, just return this IP. I think someone also mentioned in comments, like, should we do this on the DNS side? It's kind of along the same line. That's definitely an interesting idea. Yeah, and maybe, could be easier.
Yeah, I think like that's come up quite a bit, and I think the question to answer is whether the user who's configuring the policy, like, can we assume that the user is not malicious and that they're not going to go out of their way and like query another DNS server to make a request? Or like, can we assume that like every tenant on the cluster is like fairly trusted, and really we're just applying some policy to ensure that no application is accidentally resolving against something else, and we're just putting some guardrails, right? So like, if it's just like we're just putting guardrails on the DNS server, then I think like DNS configuration on the DNS server side makes sense. If we're actually trying to like prevent malicious applications from querying some DNS server or querying some DNS out of band, then I think we need the policy level. Otherwise, a rogue container can just request a FQDN from another server. So maybe good.
Yeah, I agree. That's a very good point. Actually, when we have this network policy, right, we kind of assume that not everyone is trusted. So if they do any modification on DNS side, that definitely affects everyone. It's probably probably very hard for the DNS server to distinguish. From this guy I should return this, from that guy I should return that. That sounds to be too much asked for DNS server, right? I think what you are suggesting basically is saying that we probably can do the current FQDN on the network policy level here. If in the future we want to extend it to other, like for example, cluster-wide, all those things, we might need to resort to DNS server. So maybe we could try to do this in different layer. That is another thought here.
It's almost like there's a default implementation that's obvious that solves a problem for some simple case. And then there's, yeah, like redundant ways of solving it for more secure. And I mean, it's probably true for other things in the policy API too. I assume, I don't know.
I don't know. Like so Zhang, just to be clear, like I'm not sure that I would say the DNS server side policy is like off the table. I think we should still consider that, because you can make the argument that there should be a policy on the DNS server for what FQDNs you can resolve. And then there should be network policy rules to ensure that you can only send DNS requests to that DNS server. So that kind of solves the case of like an application going rogue and trying to request an FQDN from another DNS server. Like with those two things like applied, then an application has to query like core DNS for the resolve, and then we can rely on core DNS to filter what the allowed FQDNs are. I think that's pretty reasonable as a solution. Like it's more layers on top, but like it's
but how do we distinguish the behavior for different deployments? For example, this deployment is allowed to access this FQDN, but another set of deployments don't allow. You are going to use separate DNS service for it? That's
so
at least that's not supported right now, right?
Right. So I think at a high level, when I was suggesting a separate resource, what it would look like is like there's a resource called DNS policy and its namespace, and it has a label selector that selects pods, right, in a namespace. And core DNS would watch the DNS policy resource and like allow the lookup based on whether a request came from like the pod selectors of that resource. So it's like similar to the way like we match pods with network policies, is just against DNS requests. That makes sense.
But if that's the case, then why not just implement this on the pod side and network policy? Because you can do something, right? I mean, if this guy is allowed to resolve it, you pass the request to DNS server. If it's not allowed, you just stop the DNS request, so it got failed.
Yeah, I think the most compelling answer to that is if you do it on the core DNS side, then every cluster gets it like for free, and you don't have to rely on every CNI to implement the policy blocking rules for DNS requests. I don't know if that's compelling enough.
Okay, see what you mean. So that's the advantage of, so basically you're saying that make it as different policy, different type of policy object, which then decouple with current network policy, and it could be implemented on the DNS side. That could be, yeah.
Yeah, and then like with the big caveat that your network policy should also deny DNS requests to like other DNS servers that's not the cluster DNS.
Yeah, I think we can put that as one option here for further considerations. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that anyway, if we can go back to this proposal next week, and folks, please comment, please take a look, so we can evolve this into like helping to solve the open questions, right? So I'm in our favor of coming back to this FQDN selector next week again.
Yeah.
And my final question is, what are we attempting to do? Like, are we attempting to define an API, or are we trying to do something other than that? Because I think the API thing is not that hard to do. The implementation is, well, I'm not saying it's not hard, but I'm just saying like, yeah, you know what I mean? Like what?
Well, I would think that the first thing to define the API to say, okay, which at least I look at the high level picture and see which this belongs to and where should be the enforcement points.
Yeah.
There's all the questions in this Docker about implementation details, right? I mean, I think the API is like the thing that everyone wants, right? Is just be able to block a block a domain and it always works, right?
Right, but I think the question here is should it be put into network policy or be a separate object? That definitely affects, because if you are in network policy, then network policy controller needs to handle it. If you are in a separate object, we might need to have separate controller to do it, or maybe it's totally out of this network policy scope.
The only way to decide that, though, is to have some implementation. Like, you have to have a lot of intuition around the implementation to do that, right?
Right. So I think that
that's true. That's true. I mean, your selection, like the way you have in mind on how to implement it, actually affects like which API is more preferred. That's true.
Yeah, but I think the angle is an API for this one.
Angle's what?
I was saying, like, I think the angle that we want for this, like, is an API, but some of the implementation details might guide us to what the API should look like. At least that's what I got from reading the stock.
Yeah, no dispute that everyone wants an API, I guess. The question is how. Anyways, yeah, it sounds like it's good. It sounds like it's going forward. It's interesting. So, and a lot of people want it. So hopefully we can make an impact here. That would be really cool.
Yeah.
I feel like a prototype at some point would be cool to do, but I'm probably outvoted on that. But I feel like a prototype would really help move things along.
Yeah, I also hope that we can get more use cases so that we will know that which implementation will fit those use cases better. Yeah.
I can try to gather that, like probably posting in Twitter and asking folks to ask for users what they need, why they need that.
Yeah, it might be good to go through Calico and Cilium's issue backlog and find like maybe there was an open issue requesting the feature there originally, and that might have some context too.
Yeah, that sounds a great idea. Yeah. All right, so we are over time. I've put in the agenda for the next week so we can move forward with the discussion of the FKDN proposal and also going through the caps. Hopefully Jay has already changed it from the port ranges to namespace.
Yeah, I think I just pushed it. I pushed it during this call. It doesn't say that.
I'm gonna finish mine either. So that's it. Have a nice week, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
All right.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.